Hello, fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I'm going to be talking about my experience reading Robert E. Howard for the first time. I read the Conan story, Tower of the Elephant, and I read that story on Virgil from Literally Books recommendation, and I think it was a great recommendation for a story to start with Howard, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Also, I want to thank a friend of the channel, Joe, for letting me borrow his copy of Conan. This has all the stories unedited, untouched, as Howard originally wanted them to be read, so I was glad to be able to read that. This was a wild experience. This was not the experience... Well, this was kind of the experience I expected, but also not the experience I expected. Just a real... I'm sorry if you hear a lot of wind. It's windy season here in the desert, and it will be through most of spring. I'm going to try to record when the wind's not going, but it throws dust around, and sometimes you'll be able to hear the gusts. So just a quick synopsis of this story, The Tower of the Elephant. Conan is wandering through what he calls the civilized lands. He is considered a barbarian in these lands. He has come to a place that is home to a tower called the Tower of the Elephant. And it's this strange alien-like structure in the center of this town that has these smooth walls, this tower, and all these jewels are encrusting the top of the tower, and there's a thief in a tavern talking about this tower, and he and Conan get into a discussion about why nobody's stolen from this tower before. And in the tower there's a jewel called the Heart of the Elephant that many thieves, of course, are very interested in. Conan says, well, why doesn't somebody just go steal it? And the thief is able to lay out why it is impossible to steal this. There's a garden you have to get through that has some kind of creatures that he can't even describe in it, but there's no guards because those creatures are there. Then one would have to scale the tower, get over the top, and drop down in. And there's an all-powerful sorcerer in the tower that would make it impossible for anybody to really be able to steal this jewel. Then they kind of get into a fight. I can't remember who offends whom first, but they get into a fight, and the candle goes out, and when they're finally able to light the candle again, Conan is gone, and the thief that he was talking to has been killed. And of course, Conan, being Conan, heads right over to the Tower of the Elephant to see if he can't take this jewel, the Heart of the Elephant. And the rest of the story concerns his adventure trying to get this jewel. And of course, in my opinion, the plot is secondary to the prose, and I was expecting good prose. A lot of people talk about Robert E. Howard's prose, and that expectation was met. The prose in this are really good. The best thing about them is that they're not overly flowery prose. They are eloquent and succinct. So the story flows really beautiful. This isn't hard reading. This is highly entertaining reading. For me, the heart of this story is this kind of final image, this meeting. And I can't really go into that because I don't want to give away the story, but I will be discussing it later in this video when I go into the spoiler section. So really quick, let me just talk about the publication of this story. So this is one of the first Conan stories written by Howard. I think it might be the third or the fourth. I'm not quite sure, but it is one of the early stories written by Howard about Conan. It was first published in Weird Tales magazine in the March 1933 edition. I'll put the cover up here so you can see it. Next, it was published in Skullface and Others by Arkham House in 1946. Of course, Robert E. Howard was one of the big three of the Weird Tales group. So Arkham House, of course, would do a lot of his stuff. After that, it was published in The Coming of Conan by Gnome Press. And then finally it was published in Conan, the Lancer book, which begins, I think, the edited versions of his work done by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. So it's been published quite a few times. I think it's one of the more popular ones. There is something special about Robert E. Howard's storytelling, and I haven't gotten to the end where I really want to talk about how incredible this story is. Each of these great Weird Tales writers had a unique personality. I've been kind of ranking them in my videos, but I'm going to have to stop doing that because they all have their own uniquenesses that is really incredible. So if you think of the big three, I think Lovecraft is mainly horror, and then Howard is mainly fantasy, and Clark Ashton Smith is kind of this mix of the two. Like, he does planetary fantasy, but he also does horror. And of course, Howard also does horror. And I think that aspects of the end of this story can be compared style-wise to the climaxes of Lovecraft stories and Clark Ashton Smith stories. I can see why they were all friends, and I can see how they all influenced each other, but I can also see how each of them had their own unique styles and genres that they really, really enjoyed. Should you read this? Absolutely. I am going to be reading a lot more Howard. I enjoyed it very much. It is incredible, and I'm about to tell you why, but unfortunately from here we're going to have to jump into the realm of plot spoilers. I'm sure more of you have read this than haven't. I'm kind of late to this party, but I'm glad to join. So, the story starts, and as I was reading, I was like, wow, this prose is really well done. This is very well written. But the plot was very D&D, which is fine with me. I love D&D. I played a lot of D&D. But it was like listening to the Beatles for the first time and knowing that they completely influenced all of rock. Reading Robert E. Howard was like reading the most influential, earliest version of the fantasy that became modern fantasy and then into role-playing games, D&D and stuff like that. It literally starts in a tavern. And I wasn't, at first I was like, I don't really get it. I don't know what's happening here. It just seems like your buddy telling you about the awesome things that happened in his D&D adventure, which is fun. I love listening to people talk about what happens with their characters. But in this case, it was done so in a very well-written way in a universe that was obviously very complex. But still, the story was very much just a barbarian in a tavern trying to figure out what his next dungeon delve adventure would be. So I was impressed with Howard at first, but I didn't quite know what it was that made people gush over him so much. But I, of course, read on. So he decides to go rob the tower of the sorcerer. The sorcerer's name is Yara. And he's going to rob Yara's tower and take the heart of the elephant, this gem. And he goes into Yara's garden and he has to kill somebody right away. But then he meets Taurus of Numidia, who is the Prince of Thieves. And this is a wild character because Conan is wandering into this robbery really just because he's bored or off a whim or because he wants to prove a point. Conan is a very interesting character because he is pure whim in this story. He just seems to go where he wants and do what he wants, which is kind of awesome. There's a freedom to that I think is kind of that barbarian freedom. So he goes into Yara's garden. He has to kill a guard. Right after that, he meets this Prince of Thieves. The Prince of Thieves is kind of an opposite of Conan. This is a person who has studied and prepared for this robbery for years. Many, many years. And Conan just realized, okay, we're going to have to start working together. I believe that part of this story was taken for the Conan movie. I think I've heard that. It reminded me of it the whole time. I was thinking of him going into that tower and meeting the woman there that also wanted to rob the tower. I think that's the first Conan movie. Anyway, that was familiar to me at the beginning. But in this case, we get the Prince of Thieves. And he is really prepared. So suddenly they are surrounded by these beasts in the bushes. And Conan's kind of scared because he doesn't know what they are. And they might be magical creatures. But it turns out they're lions. So these lions are out in the garden at night. That's why there's no guards, because the lions will tear anybody to shreds. But the Prince of Thieves has come prepared for this. He has a tube, and he blows this yellow mist over the lions, and it kills the lions. And Conan's like, wow, why don't you just do that to all the guards and everything? And he says, in order to get this powder... that's how I got the name, the Prince of Thieves, because this stuff is so rare. I had to steal it from this very important person, and so on and so forth. So this guy's been planning for this heist for like probably over a decade, I would swear. But yeah, the lions are killed, so they go, and he throws a grappling hook of... I think he said the rope is made of the hair of maidens, and then strengthened with something. It's really, this is one of the fun parts about this story. And I said earlier that the universe is very complex, and I think that complexity shows beautifully here. That there's all these herbs, and there's the way you talk about things and the way things are called. This is a well thought out culture, and I really appreciate that. The world building, I guess, the easiest way to say this is the world building is really incredible in this. So he throws this grappling hook with this human hair rope up, and suddenly a lion that got away attacks, and it's about to kill the Prince of Thieves, and Conan's super quick instincts kick in, and he kills the lion, thus saving the Prince of Thieves. I want to stop here for a second and say that one of the things that I was afraid of was that Conan would be a Mary Sue, and that is absolutely not the case. Conan is very flawed. He is... I don't even think he would have made it out of this situation alive if the thief hadn't been there. Maybe he would. I haven't read enough Conan. But to me, it felt like he could not have made it through this situation without the thief. His brashness is, by definition, the negative aspect of his character, but also the fun aspect for us to read. So he has the typical flaws of a barbarian, and I think that, I don't know if Robert E. Howard invented these, but and they're just so commonplace to us now that we of course go, oh, he is the typical barbarian. I think we're back far enough that Robert E. Howard invented what we now consider the typical barbarian. So yeah, he's a complicated character in that he's not he's the brawn. He's not the brains, he's the brawn, and he runs into the brains, luckily, and I think that it saves him. But also, of course, the thief, the Prince of Thieves, wouldn't have made it without Conan. He would have died to that lion. Conan has saved him, and he has saved Conan. So they climb up to the top of the tower. They drop into the room, and it's like a hallway, and there's this jewel-encrusted door, and they go and check the knob, and it's open. And it's this room made of crystal, absolutely beautiful. One of the things I always loved about the Conan movies is the amazing sets they did. Even the second one, I feel like, with its flaws, one of the things you can say about it is it's some of the best sets from the 80s ever. Just incredible sets. So they're about to go in the room, and the Prince of Thieves turns to Conan and says, hey, go up and check one time all the way around the perimeter of the top of the tower. Look over into the gardens to make sure that our exit route is still there and that the guards haven't discovered anything. And Conan's like, well, that feels kind of weird. But he goes and does it. And of course, the Prince of Thieves sneaks into the room while Conan's doing that, and then suddenly runs back out and dies soon after. I don't need to go into great detail of this. I feel like the reason that I'm wanting to go into great detail is because of how well this is written. It's really incredible. But anyway, Conan goes into the room. It turns out there's a spider in there that killed the Prince of Thieves. Conan has to kill it. The action is described beautifully. Robert E. Howard can absolutely write a fight. It's incredible. This cat is putting my legs to sleep. But it's part 3, the part I'm going to get to now, that made me want to jump up from my chair as I was reading it and cheer, because it was so weird and so good and so strange. And I think this is the secret of Robert E. Howard. This is the thing that makes him such a well-known weird fiction writer, and one of the big 3. So he goes into the next room, and in the next room there is kind of an altar, and like a big altar, and an idol sitting on it. And the idol is a humanoid form with the head of an elephant. But the best part about this is that Conan has never seen an elephant. He's heard tell of elephants, but has never seen an elephant. So the description he gives of this idol is absolutely incredible. And then the idol opens its eyes, and the prose goes cosmic, strange, hallucinatory. I don't think I will ever forget the image of this humanoid with this massive, heavy elephant head. It is incredible. And it turns out that at first, this is a god. And of course, I think about Ganesh. I hope that's the right god I'm speaking of from Hinduism. If not, I seriously apologize. So we've had this image of humanoid forms with the head of elephants in the past, but the realism, the almost body horror aspect that Robert E. Howard describes this, I mean, the whole story just goes so weird, so quick. And then it takes another layer. It jumps up another layer, and we find out that this is an alien from another world. It gets cosmic horror, which in weird fiction, I know we're never far away from cosmic horror. So this D&D style barbarian thief side adventure contains fantasy, horror, cosmic horror, and some of the best imagery I've ever seen presented through prose that was just absolutely incredible. I really can't gush about this enough. And I'll tell you, I was afraid. When I was reading the first 2 parts, I was afraid, because I was like, yeah, this is well written, but I don't see why this is so beloved. And then I hit that 3rd part, and I don't think I mean, it's weird when you can tell a writer is on a roll. What comes to mind when I try to think of, okay, who writes like Howard? And I can only, of course, think about what I've read recently. And of course, Lovecraft, during the end of his stories, can get just as intense with his end images. So those two write similarly. But I also think about Jeff Vandermeer, specifically the end of Annihilation, that first book, when everything comes down to it, and we, the reader, through the eyes of the biologist, meet the thing. And I don't want to go into any more detail than that. The writing gets like, I think, up to the level of Robert E. Howard in that. Writing that flows that well, that has such incredible imagery, is addictive. It's hard to find. And I found it really, truly, at the end of this, was just absolutely amazing. Anyway, I think you get the point. The ending of this is incredible. It really doesn't have anything to do with Conan. I was so expecting that he would have to fight his way out, but Conan is merely the witness to the end of a years-long fight between this humanoid elephant. What's his name? He's got a name. Yag Kosha is the humanoid elephant's name, and Yar, it's their story in the end. It's not Conan's story. In fact, it's really interesting to say that when you think about it, very little of this is Conan's story. In some ways, it's the Prince of Thieves stories, and then Yag Koyash, I think I said that right. It's the humanoid elephant story. But again, I'm going to put up this picture here again. This image, read it for this image. Read it for when Conan realizes that this idol of the humanoid with the elephant head is alive. It'll take your breath. It's absolutely incredible. I highly recommend Robert E. Howard. I'm going to be reading a lot more as I continue on checking out all the weird fiction I missed when I was a teenager. All right, thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, please click like, subscribe, comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, we do have a Patreon. I put up a video a week over there that I do not put up on YouTube. Plus, you'll get access to the Discord, where we chat about all kinds of fun science fiction, horror, fantasy, and we do have quite a bit of fun over there, so come check it out. All right, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.